we live in a modern world. Luckily for us, living in this world, we've figured out the basic big questions. Among those basic big questions involves a proper understanding of the self, and very specifically what that involves is an understanding, not a view, but an understanding, a proper understanding. We are unique individuals, and as such, our goal in life, if we're going to lead a flourishing life, is to look within, to discover ourselves, and to love ourselves for who we are, and then to be sincere and authentic to that true self, come what may. And every time we see a difficult problem, a difficult decision, a difficult society, we always say, yes, but what is true to me? And how can I authentically live my life on my own terms? And if you do that, the assumption is, by definition, you do live your life on your terms. You decide for yourself what it is you want. And if all of us are doing this, we over time will create a great society because all of us are unique individuals supporting that vision, and each of us therefore are being encouraged to so find ourselves and live our lives on our own terms. And this is all contrasted often to what we think came before this. People live to varying degrees in what are often called traditional societies. Societies in which, unlike us, they were told what to do. They were born into a world that had very defined social positions, and they would do things like rituals that would socialize them into playing out those proper roles. They also had a defined vision of the world, a defined understanding of the cosmos, and rituals too would help to socialize people into living properly within that defined vision of the cosmos. So their belief system, their social structure, their very role in life was given to them at birth, and their goal was simply to live properly within it, to accord with it, to harmonize with it. If you want to think of the culture, the society, the civilization that most perfectly encapsulates that understanding of a traditional society, that seems indeed sort of the perfect other, often tends stereotypically to be China, particularly ancient China, where sure enough we tend to think they had that defined social structure. They had a pre-given vision of the cosmos. It's a harmonious cosmos, and we humans are just basically doing a bunch of rituals to be socialized into living within it. Most of my students would take something along the following lines if you ask them about, say, Chinese philosophy. Yeah, there's one group of philosophers called Confucians, and they kind of think you should do a bunch of rituals to be socialized into playing your social roles, and they're kind of the bad guys. And then there are some good guys, they're called the Taoists, and they at least, from our perspective, have a more, well, a possible way of thinking of a traditional world in a kind of more romanticized sense. Sure, they thought there was a harmonious world and you had to learn to live within it, but at least they thought that by doing so, you could harmoniously and joyously live within this larger harmony, and therefore, you would be freed from, say, the alienation that's a part and parcel of the individual lives that we lead. And so at least the Taoists would be seen as a kind of a good other. So my students tend to come in with basically that vision. And literally for them, it's a question during their college years, given that general vision, of in this specific time to find themselves, to look within, figure out who they are, and sort of direct their future lives accordingly. Things I'm good at, things I'm not good at, and what kind of a career, what kind of a life would be good for me given who I am. My generation's idea is that they're kind of living within. Why then do they find very exciting ideas that are very different? I actually think it's for a very intriguing reason. And again, I would like to generalize it beyond just this generation, but I think it's a very specifically generational moment. I think what they are finding is that this ideology that kind of my generation bequeathed to them isn't quite working. I think all of them tend, or the vast majority, to not be too dramatic, the vast majority grow up thinking it's right. There's not a better thing out there. There are no other alternatives out there, but it doesn't seem to be quite working. The world doesn't seem to be working as well as my generation thought it would be if we just did the things that we were telling them to do. They seem to be endlessly searching for this thing, and they're not quite sure what they're finding. And I found it a generation in my 20 years of teaching that is most open to sort of rethinking everything. And I think the reason they have found these ideas from China so exciting is that they offer a fundamental challenge to almost every single assumption that I just began with. They actually start reading these texts. We read them only in their primary sources. They start reading these texts, and they suddenly see ideas that not only are utterly, totally different from the stereotypes about them, which is sort of intriguing in itself and sort of intriguing historical fact, but much more importantly, what strikes them is these are ideas that offer a very fundamental challenge to the even idea of looking within and finding oneself. In fact, it's much stronger. They actually had ideas like that in China too, and the response was, from the thinkers that become very important in the tradition, these ideas not only are not liberatory, they're actually constraining and restraining what we can become as human beings. And they argued against them. And when they talked about, on the contrary, doing things like rituals, they actually had a very surprising definition of rituals, a very surprising definition of how one can grow as a human being. And I think a lot of my students are flocking to these ideas because these ideas, seem to be onto something fundamental about human psychology that perhaps we, with our very defined vision of the self, are systematically missing.